Right now, underneath the keyboard you're typing on, or inside the slim chassis of the laptop sitting on your desk, there's a piece of hardware that holds everything. Every file you have ever saved, every photo you have ever taken, every document you have ever written, every application you depend on to do your work, run your business, and manage your life. It is your SSD, your solid-state drive, and it is dying faster than it should be. Not because it is defective, not because you bought the wrong one, but because Windows 11 is configured right out of the box with a set of default settings that are silently, continuously, and methodically wearing it down. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which 7 settings are responsible, exactly what they are doing to your drive behind the scenes, and exactly how to turn every single one of them off. But before we get to the fixes, you need to understand what is actually happening at a hardware level, because once you see it, you will understand why this is not a minor technical detail, but a financial issue that could cost you hundreds or even thousands of dollars if you ignore it long enough. Let us start with the fundamental question that most people have never actually sat down and answered. How does an SSD work and why does it wear out? Because unlike a traditional hard drive, which stores data on spinning magnetic platters and can theoretically be read and written indefinitely without physical degradation of the media, an SSD works on a completely different principle. An SSD stores data in cells made of a material called a NAND flash memory. Each cell stores data as electrical charges, ones and zeros, and each time a cell is written to, a small amount of electrical current must pass through the insulating layer of the cell to change its state. That insulating layer, made of silicon oxide, is extraordinarily thin, measured in nanometers, and every single write operation degrades it microscopically. It is not noticeable after one write. It is not noticeable after 1,000 writes. But after tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of write cycles on the same cell, the degradation accumulates to the point where the cell can no longer reliably hold a charge. It becomes unreliable. It fails, and when enough cells fail, the drive fails. SSD manufacturers measure this limit in a unit called TBW, terabytes written. A typical consumer SSD might have a TBW rating of 300 or 600 or 1,000 terabytes, meaning the manufacturer has tested and determined that the drive can reliably sustain that total volume of write operations over its lifetime. Once you exceed that number, you are in territory where drive failure becomes increasingly probable. The drive does not fall off a cliff at exactly the TBW limit, but the risk curve rises sharply. And here is the critical thing you need to understand. The TBW rating is based on normal usage. It accounts for the expected pattern of a user saving files, installing software, and doing regular computing tasks. It does not account for an operating system that is configured to perform unnecessary, excessive, and redundant write operations constantly in the background, draining your drive's finite write budget on tasks that serve no real purpose for you at all. And that is exactly what Windows 11, with its default settings, is doing. Every day, while you sit at your desk doing your work, Windows is writing to your SSD in the background for reasons ranging from useful but configurable to almost entirely pointless. And collectively, those background writes are consuming a portion of your drive's TBW rating that you will never get back. Every unnecessary write that happens today is a write that cannot happen in the future, when you actually need it. You are being charged against a budget you did not know you had, for expenses you did not authorize. The financial dimension of this is worth understanding clearly, because SSD failure is not just an inconvenience. It is an economic event. A premium NVMe SSD, the kind that comes in modern laptops and high-performance desktops, costs anywhere from $80 for a basic 1 terabyte drive to several $100s for a high-capacity, high-performance model. Enterprise-grade SSDs used in small business servers and workstations can cost significantly more. When a drive fails, you pay for the replacement hardware. You pay for the time it takes to reinstall your operating system and applications. And if you do not have a current backup, and surveys consistently show that the majority of home users and a troubling percentage of small business users do not maintain regular backups. You potentially pay for professional data recovery services, which can cost anywhere from $300 to over $1,000 with no guarantee of success. The global market for data recovery services is valued at over $12 billion annually, and it is growing. That is $12 billion spent by individuals and organizations trying to retrieve data from drives that failed, in many cases, before they should have. A significant portion of those failures are drives that reached the end of their usable write life prematurely, not because the drive was poorly made, but because software running on the system was consuming write endurance at a rate far higher than necessary. The 7 settings we are going to discuss today are major contributors to exactly that problem on Windows 11 machines around the world. And beyond the hardware cost is the data cost, which for most people is far more significant. What is on your SSD right now that you cannot replace? If it failed today, what would you lose? For a business owner, the answer might be years of client files, financial records, contracts, and communications. For a creative professional, it might be an entire portfolio of work, photographs, videos, design files, music recordings. For a student, it might be a thesis or dissertation representing years of research. For a parent, it might be irreplaceable family memories, photographs, and videos of moments that can never be recreated. The data on your drive has a value that vastly exceeds the cost of the hardware. And anything that shortens the life of that hardware is a threat to data with a value that cannot be measured in dollars at all. So let us go through the 7 settings one by one, understanding what each one does, why it is harmful to your SSD specifically, and exactly what to do about it. The first setting is one that almost every Windows user has heard of, but almost no one has ever thought critically about in the context of SSD health. It is called the page file, or virtual memory. Here's what it does. When your computer runs out of physical RAM, the memory chips on your motherboard where your actively running programs live, Windows needs somewhere to put the overflow. So it carves out a section of your storage drive and uses it as an extension of RAM, reading and writing data to it constantly as programs demand more memory than is physically available. On traditional spinning hard drives, this was an acceptable compromise. The drives could handle the writes, and the alternative, running out of memory and crashing, was worse. But on an SSD, virtual memory paging is one of the most write-intensive operations that Windows performs, and it does it continuously. Every time Windows pages data out to the drive because RAM is getting full, that is a write. Every time it reads it back because a program needs it again, that is a read. If you have programs running that collectively demand more RAM than you have installed, this paging can happen thousands of times per hour, constantly hammering the same region of your SSD with write operations. On a machine with 4 or 8 gigabytes of RAM running modern applications, this can be a significant ongoing drain on your drive's write endurance. The fix here is twofold. First, if you have the ability to upgrade your RAM, doing so dramatically reduces how often Windows resorts to paging. Moving from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes of RAM is one of the single most effective things you can do for both your performance and your SSD longevity. Second, you can configure the page file settings. Go to the Start menu and type View Advanced System Settings. Open that. Go to the Performance section and click Settings. Go to the Advanced tab and click Change under Virtual Memory. By default, Windows manages the page file size automatically, and the automatically managed size is often larger than it needs to be. You can either set a custom size that is more conservative if you have adequate RAM, or on systems with 16 or more gigabytes of RAM, some users choose to disable the page file entirely, though this requires careful judgment and is not appropriate for all systems. At minimum, understanding that this mechanism is writing constantly to your SSD and taking steps to reduce how often it is needed, primarily by having adequate RAM, is an important part of protecting your drive. The second setting is hibernation, and the way it interacts with SSDs is something that most Windows users have never considered. Hibernate is a power state in which Windows saves the entire contents of your RAM to a file on your storage drive called Hyperfill, SIS, and then powers the machine off completely. When you turn the machine back on, it reads that file back into RAM and resumes exactly where you left off. It is convenient, it is fast to resume, and on a laptop where battery life matters, it has legitimate uses. But every time you hibernate, Windows writes the entire contents of your RAM to your SSD. If you have 16 gigabytes of RAM, that is 16 gigabytes written to your drive in one hibernation event. If you have 32 gigabytes of RAM, it is 32 gigabytes. If you hibernate once a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, on a machine with 16 gigabytes of RAM, that is 4 terabytes of writes from hibernation alone every single year, consumed from your drive's TBW budget before you have written a single byte of your own files. For desktop computers that are always plugged in, hibernation serves almost no purpose. You can put the machine to sleep, which uses the same continuous trickle of power to maintain RAM without writing anything to the drive, and you get the same fast resume experience without any drive writes at all. For laptops, the calculus is slightly more nuanced because Hibernate is genuinely useful when the battery is critically low and you want to preserve your session. But for most laptop users who plug in regularly, the convenience of Hibernate is not worth the ongoing write cost. To disable Hibernate, open the Start menu, type Command Prompt, right-click it, and select Run as Administrator. Type the command powercfg/h off and press Enter. This disables hibernation and also deletes the Hyperfill sys file from your drive, freeing up whatever space it was consuming, which is typically equal to about 75% of your installed RAM. For a system with 16 gigabytes of RAM, that might be 12 gigabytes of storage space returned to you immediately, in addition to the ongoing write savings. The third setting involves a Windows feature called Superfetch, which in Windows 11 goes by the name Sysmain. The idea behind this feature was reasonable when it was designed for spinning hard drives. Sysmain monitors which applications you use most frequently and preloads them into RAM in advance, so that when you click to open them, they appear faster because the data is already in memory rather than needing to be read from disk. On a slow spinning hard drive, where reading data takes time, this preloading meaningfully improved the user experience. But on a modern NVMe SSD, which can read data at speeds of 3,000, 4,000, or even 7,000 megabytes per second, the latency of loading an application from storage is already so low that preloading provides essentially no perceptible benefit. What Sysmain does provide on an SSD is a continuous stream of unnecessary read and write operations as it monitors your usage patterns, updates its database of frequently used applications, and manages its preloaded data in memory. It writes its usage data to your drive regularly. It generates disk activity constantly in the background. And unlike on a spinning hard drive where it was doing something genuinely useful, on an SSD, it is largely wasted activity that contributes to drive wear without providing a meaningful benefit. To disable Sysmain, press the Windows key and R simultaneously to open the Run dialog. Type services, MSC, and press Enter. A long list of Windows services will open. Scroll down until you find Sysmain. Double-click it. In the Startup Type drop-down, change it from automatic to disabled. Click Stop to stop it immediately, then click OK. You will not notice any degradation in performance. On an SSD, your applications will load just as fast as before, because the limiting factor on application load times is no longer the speed of reading from storage, but other factors in the application's initialization process. What you will notice is less background disk activity and a slightly quieter drive. The fourth setting is one that is connected to something you probably interact with every single day, and therefore never think to question. It is Windows Search Indexing. Windows maintains a searchable index of every file on your drive, every document, every spreadsheet, every image file name, every email if you use a desktop email client, every piece of content in your user folders. This index is what allows the Windows search feature to return results almost instantly when you type in the search bar, rather than having to scan through your entire drive in real time every time you search. The indexing service runs in the background continuously, monitoring your drive for new and changed files and updating the index accordingly. Every update to the index is a write to your SSD. On a system with a large number of files that are frequently added, modified, or deleted, the indexing service can generate a substantial and ongoing volume of write operations. For users who use Windows Search heavily and rely on it to find files quickly, the indexing service provides genuine value, and the trade-off might be worth it. But many users, particularly those who keep their files organized in a predictable folder structure, or who use a dedicated file management application, search Windows less than a handful of times per week. For those users, maintaining a continuously updated index of every file on the drive is an expensive write operation being performed for a benefit they rarely use. You can address this in two ways. The most targeted approach is to reduce the scope of indexing. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Searching Windows. Change the setting from Enhanced, which indexes your entire drive, to Classic, which indexes only common locations like your desktop, documents, and downloads folders. This dramatically reduces the volume of content being indexed, and therefore the volume of index write operations. If you want to go further, you can open the Start menu and type Indexing Options, open the Control Panel item that appears, and click Modify to remove specific locations from the index entirely. Alternatively, for users who rarely use Windows Search at all, you can disable the indexing service entirely through the same services panel we used for Sysmain. Find Windows Search in the list, set it to Disabled, and stop it. Be aware that this will make the Windows search bar slower for file searches, returning results over several seconds rather than instantly. If you use Search frequently, stick to the scoped approach. If you almost never use it, disabling it entirely is a legitimate option. The fifth setting is something that Microsoft added with good intentions, but that creates a consistent ongoing drain on SSD write life that most users have never been told about. It is called Windows Update Delivery Optimization, and what it does is turn your computer into a peer-to-peer distribution node for Windows updates. The idea is that instead of every Windows PC in the world downloading updates directly from Microsoft servers, PCs can share update files with each other, reducing the load on Microsoft's infrastructure and potentially speeding up downloads for some users. Your computer downloads update files and then makes them available for upload to other PCs on your local network, or with the default setting, to other Windows PCs anywhere on the internet. The problem from an SSD perspective is that this feature causes Windows to continuously write downloaded update content to your drive, not just for your own machine's updates, but potentially for other people's updates as well. It reads that content back and uploads it to other machines. It manages a cache of this content, writing and rewriting as the cache is managed. All of this is happening in the background, generating write activity on your SSD for the benefit of Microsoft's content delivery infrastructure, with no direct benefit to you whatsoever. To change this, go to Settings, then Windows Update, then Advanced Options, then Delivery Optimization. You will see an option that says Allow downloads from other PCs. If this is turned on, you can either turn it off entirely, which stops your machine from being used as a distribution node at all, or you can change the setting from PCs on the internet to PCs on my local network, which at least limits the scope. Turning it off entirely is the recommendation for anyone prioritizing SSD longevity, particularly on home machines that are not part of a managed enterprise network where delivery optimization serves a more legitimate purpose. The sixth setting is one that lives in a part of Windows that most users never visit, and it has a name that makes it sound important and necessary when in reality it is largely redundant on modern SSDs. It is called the write cache buffer flushing setting, and understanding it requires a small amount of technical context. When your operating system writes data to your SSD, it does not always write directly to the storage cells immediately. Instead, it holds the data in a buffer, a temporary holding area, and writes it to the actual storage in larger batches. This is more efficient because writing in larger batches is faster and puts less wear on the storage cells than writing tiny amounts constantly. The write cache buffer flush is the mechanism by which Windows periodically forces all buffered writes to actually commit to the physical storage cells, ensuring that data is not lost if power is suddenly cut. Turning off write cache buffer flushing means that Windows will be more aggressive about holding data in the buffer and less aggressive about flushing it immediately to the physical storage, which can reduce the total number of write operations performed on the drive. Modern SSDs have their own internal power loss protection mechanisms and cache management systems that handle this appropriately. However, this is a setting that should be approached with some care because on systems without an uninterruptible power supply, a sudden power loss while a large amount of data is in the write cache and not yet committed to storage could theoretically result in data corruption. On a desktop machine plugged directly into a wall outlet without a battery backup, think carefully before making this change. On a laptop with a battery that prevents sudden power loss, it is a much lower risk adjustment. To access this setting, open Device Manager, which you can find by right-clicking the Start button. Expand the disk drives category. Right-click your SSD and select Properties. Go to the Policies tab. You will see the option to turn off Windows write cache buffer flushing on the device. Evaluate whether this makes sense for your specific situation, and if you do make the change, ensure you have a robust backup strategy in place. The seventh setting is perhaps the most surprising on this list because it is something that Windows markets as a helpful feature, something that is intended to improve your experience, but that creates a pattern of write activity on your SSD that is entirely unnecessary given how modern storage drives work. It is the drive indexing and file system attribute writing that occurs because of a Windows feature called last access time stamping. Every single time Windows reads a file, not writes it, reads it, the file system records the exact time of that last access and writes that timestamp back to the file's metadata on the drive. Think about what that means in practice. Every time a program reads a configuration file, every time Windows checks a system file, every time your browser reads a cached resource, every time any application reads any file for any reason, Windows writes a timestamp to the drive. A read operation triggers a write operation, every single time. On a modern SSD that might be performing thousands of file reads per hour during normal operation, this adds up to an enormous volume of completely unnecessary write operations. The last access timestamp exists because in the early days of computing, this information was sometimes used by backup software and archiving utilities to determine which files had been recently accessed and therefore might need to be backed up. In modern computing environments, this information is almost never used for anything meaningful, and the backup software and system management tools that do need this kind of information have better mechanisms for tracking it. The last access timestamp is a feature from a different era of computing that has been carried forward into Windows 11 and is enabled by default, writing to your SSD millions of times per year for no practical benefit. To disable last access timestamping, open Command Prompt as administrator, the same way we did for the Hibernate fix, by right-clicking Command Prompt in the Start menu and selecting Run as administrator. Type the command of sudo behavior set, disable last access 1, and press Enter. The 1 at the end tells Windows to disable the last access time updates. You will not notice any change in how your computer performs. You will not lose any functionality. Your files will all behave exactly as before. But Windows will stop performing that constant cascade of write operations triggered by every single file read, and your SSD's write budget will be spent on things that actually matter. Now let us step back from the individual settings and talk about the bigger picture, because understanding these 7 changes is valuable, but understanding them in context is even more valuable. We are living through a moment of profound transition in personal computing. The shift from spinning hard drives to solid-state storage has been one of the most impactful changes in consumer technology in the last 20 years. SSDs are faster by an order of magnitude. They are more durable against physical shock. They are lighter and smaller. They run cooler and quieter. They have transformed the experience of using a computer in ways that are immediately and tangibly felt. Boot times that used to be measured in minutes are now measured in seconds. Applications that used to take 30 seconds to load open instantly. File operations that used to be painfully slow are now nearly instantaneous. But the shift to SSDs also introduced the write endurance constraint that we have been discussing, and the software industry has been slow to fully adapt to it. Operating systems like Windows were designed in an era when storage was spinning magnetic media, where write endurance was essentially unlimited, and the primary concerns were speed and capacity. Many of the features and default behaviors in Windows 11 today are architectural decisions that were made for a world of spinning hard drives, and were never meaningfully revisited when SSDs became the dominant storage medium. Hibernation, page file behavior, indexing strategies, write caching, last access timestamps, these were all designed for a different kind of storage, and their interaction with SSD write endurance was simply not a primary consideration. This matters economically at a scale that is worth appreciating. There are estimated to be over 1 billion Windows PCs actively in use globally. A substantial and growing majority of those machines now use SSDs as their primary storage. If each of those SSDs is losing even a modest amount of write endurance daily due to these unnecessary background operations, the aggregate economic impact, measured in premature drive replacements, data recovery costs, lost productivity, and failed hardware warranties, runs into the billions of dollars globally. This is not a niche issue. This is a systemic inefficiency baked into the most widely used operating system in human history, affecting the storage devices of hundreds of millions of people. There is also the environmental dimension. Every SSD that fails prematurely and needs to be replaced is a device that ends up in the electronics waste stream. Electronic waste is one of the fastest growing waste categories globally, and SSDs contain materials, metals, and chemicals that require specialized and expensive processing to handle safely. Extending the useful life of storage devices by configuring the operating system to use them more efficiently is not just a financial win for individual users. It is a reduction in the environmental cost of computing at a meaningful scale. But let us bring it back to you specifically, because the most immediate and personal dimension of this is about your data and your money. Your SSD is one of the few components in your computer that degrades with use in a measurable and irreversible way. Every write that happens brings it a finite step closer to the end of its useful life. The total write budget is fixed. You can measure it, monitor it, and manage it. And the 7 settings we have discussed today are collectively responsible for a significant portion of the unnecessary write operations that Windows performs on your drive. Let me give you the tools to actually measure where your drive stands right now, because knowledge without measurement is incomplete. There is a free tool called Crystal Disk Info available at Crystalmark. Info that reads the SMART data from your SSD and displays it in a readable format. SMART stands for self-monitoring, analysis, and reporting technology, and it is a system built into storage drives that tracks dozens of health metrics, including total bytes written, power on hours, reallocated sectors, and an overall health status. Download Crystal Disk Info, install it, and run it. Look at the total bytes written value for your SSD. Compare it to the TBW rating listed in your drive's specifications, which you can find by searching for your exact drive model. This tells you what percentage of your drive's rated write endurance has been consumed and gives you a baseline for understanding how quickly it is being used. After you make the 7 changes we have discussed today, run Crystal Disk Info again in a week, and note how the total bytes written figure has changed. Compare that rate of increase to what it was before the changes. Many users who have made these adjustments and tracked their drive writes report a significant reduction in the rate of write accumulation. In some cases, more than 30 or 40% less daily write activity. That percentage directly translates to an extension of the expected life of the drive. A drive that was on track to reach its TBW limit in 4 years might now be projected to reach it in 6 or 7 years. That is 2 or 3 extra years of reliable service from a piece of hardware you already own, achieved purely through software configuration changes. There is also a broader set of habits and practices that complement the specific settings changes, and they are worth mentioning because they compound the benefit. Enabling trim, which is a command that allows the operating system to inform the SSD which data blocks are no longer in use so the drive can manage them more efficiently, is one of them. Trim should be enabled by default in Windows 11, but you can verify this by opening Command Prompt as administrator and typing fsudo behavior query disable delete notify. If the result is 0, trim is enabled. If it is 1, type fsudo behavior set disable delete notify 0 to enable it. Keeping your SSD from filling up completely is another important practice. SSDs perform wear leveling, a process of distributing write operations across all the cells in the drive so that no single area wears out faster than others, and they need free space to do this effectively. Keeping at least 10 to 15% of your drive's capacity free at all times gives the controller the room it needs to manage wear leveling efficiently. An SSD that is 95% full cannot level wear effectively, which causes certain cells to be written to far more frequently than others, accelerating localized wear and reducing overall drive life. Keeping your SSD firmware updated is also worth doing because drive manufacturers regularly release firmware updates that improve the drive's internal management algorithms, fix bugs that can cause excessive write amplification, and improve compatibility with operating system features. You can check for firmware updates through your drive manufacturer's website or through tools they provide, and installing them is generally straightforward and can meaningfully improve the drive's efficiency and longevity. Now let me give you a clear sequential action plan so that when this video ends, you know exactly what to do and in what order. Start with the hibernation fix because it is fast, has no downsides on a desktop, and immediately frees up storage space in addition to stopping a large category of unnecessary writes. Open Command Prompt as administrator, type power cfg/h off and press enter. Done. Next, address delivery optimization. Go to Settings, Windows Update, Advanced Options, Delivery Optimization, and either turn it off entirely or restrict it to local network only. This takes 30 seconds and immediately stops your machine from being used as a content distribution node for Microsoft. Then go to the Sysmain service. Press Windows key and R, type services. MSysy, find Sysmain, double-click it, set it to disabled, and click Stop. This reduces background disk activity continuously from this point forward. Then adjust your search indexing scope. Go to Settings, Privacy and Security, Searching Windows, and change from Enhanced to Classic. This narrows the indexing footprint significantly without eliminating the functionality. Then run the last access timestamp command. Open Command Prompt as administrator and type fsudo behavior set disable last access 1 and press enter. This one command stops a constant cascade of redundant write operations that has been happening every minute of every day without your knowledge. Then review your virtual memory settings. Go to View Advanced System Settings, Performance Settings, Advanced, Virtual Memory Change, and assess whether the page file size is set appropriately for your RAM level. If you have 16 gigabytes of RAM or more, consider setting a custom, smaller page file size rather than letting Windows manage it automatically at a potentially inflated size. Finally, if you're on a laptop and hibernate regularly, think carefully about whether the convenience of hibernation is worth the write cost for your usage pattern. If you plug in regularly and sleep is an adequate alternative, disabling Hibernate will save you a significant volume of writes over the life of the machine. And on top of all of this, download Crystal Disk Info, check your current drive health, note your total bytes written figure, and schedule a monthly check so you can track how your drive is doing over time. This gives you visibility into the health of one of your most important and most vulnerable pieces of hardware, and it gives you early warning if something changes in a way that warrants attention. Your SSD is not replaceable on a whim. It is not a consumable that you budget for like printer ink. It is a critical piece of infrastructure that everything on your computer depends on, and the data it holds is in many cases irreplaceable. Treating it accordingly, understanding how it works, configuring your operating system to interact with it intelligently, and monitoring its health over time is not a technical exercise reserved for enthusiasts. It is basic digital literacy for anyone who uses a modern computer and cares about the files on it. The 7 settings we covered today are a starting point, but the mindset they represent is what matters most. The default configuration of an operating system is not designed around the best interests of your specific hardware. It is designed around averages, around compatibility, around features that serve marketing purposes, around architectural decisions made years or decades ago that have never been revisited. Your job as the person using that operating system is to understand it well enough to configure it for your situation, your hardware, your priorities, and your needs. You now have everything you need to do exactly that. The commands, the settings paths, the explanations, the context. In 30 minutes of configuration work today, you can meaningfully extend the life of a piece of hardware that cost you real money and holds data that is worth even more. There is no technical knowledge required that you do not already have after watching this video. There is no risk of damaging anything if you follow the steps as described. There is only the choice between continuing to let Windows slowly drain your drive's finite write budget on tasks that serve no one, and taking control of your own hardware and making it work for you instead of against you. Make those changes today. Check your drive health tonight. And remember that the most expensive hardware problem is always the one that was preventable and was not prevented. Your SSD is still healthy right now. Keep it that way.